Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of IHL in Film. Today we'll be looking at a tragic but quite beautiful movie, Farha. It's on Netflix right now. It's raised quite a bit of controversy, but I think it's a good movie for us to discuss some of the events and the history of the Palestine-Israel conflict. So as always, I'm joined with Aisha Malik. And Aisha, what did you think of the movie?
I thought it was a really, really nice movie. I also like how you did the Arabic ha with the Farha.
I try.
Yeah. It was really so beautifully shot. And I think it really took you back in time to that era. As in, their culture is so rich. And it was
absolutely.
so nice to see that. And you almost think, oh, you went from this to t-shirt and jeans. Like, how did we let go of our culture so much?
No, that's
really?
true. I mean, just on that part, I thought it was so interesting how Palestine is a big part of Pakistani's life or people in the Muslim world, right? And yet we know so little. Like I couldn't picture a Palestinian village until I'd seen this.
Same. Yeah.
And it's a beautiful village that they initially live in. It's a stunning location. So it's just really sad that we have such little visualization of issues that are important to us.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's the power of film as well, in that it kind of brings that home to people. I mean, when you compare it, you're like, how many films on certain areas have I seen? Slavery in America being one of them, the Holocaust being another. And then there are so many other tragedies that are equally poignant, are equally horrific, and yet we don't see them play out on film.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, exactly on this point, I think, we're talking about 1948, 1947, the partition of the subcontinent, and the tragedy. I mean, just the sheer numbers alone of the partition and everything that took place there. Before that, during the Great Wars, we had the famine, millions and millions of people dying here, and yet it is never visualized.
Yeah,
we can't really put a picture or frame that within our minds until we see something like that. We've seen those still images of emaciated South Asians, our people who have been affected by that, but it's just not something that we can relate to until someone comes up with something like this. And so 100%. I think it's really important.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to look at it in the sense of which stories are being told and which aren't, and why aren't they?
Absolutely.
And even when I was reading up about the film after watching it, Netflix got under a huge amount of Israeli pressure to take down the movie. There was a concerted campaign to leave negative reviews on IMDb. Actually, the IMDb rating for it was really low. And then everyone cocked on and was like, no, get on IMDb and give this film positive reviews.
Wow.
And it's really that notion of soft power in that how that plays out. And Israel is so against watching the film, which I think is why we all need to be watching this film.
Yeah, but I just don't understand why. I mean, the movie itself is this tiny glimpse into this massive tragedy, the catastrophe, the Nakba that took place. It's just, through the eyes of one little girl who just wants to go to school, her seeing, one particular incident that's taking place.
Yeah.
And that's really what the entire movie is based on, and I just don't see why there's so much conflict that's been developed from that.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me because it was very Anne Frank reminiscent, apparently, because that's the story that everybody knows and everyone learns at school, and yet this is a girl who her dad has locked her up in this room to try and protect her, and she's living it out in that room, and you kind of go through it with her because there's a portion of the film which is so beautiful with the light coming into the room, and yet you live the boredom of that time that she spends in that room because she's like trying to forage for food. She's just waiting for something to happen, and you're also waiting in the film.
No, and what I thought was, I mean, you hit it. Exactly, is that you feel the frustration she's feeling when she can't get out, or when she hears the baby crying outside, and she's trying everything in her power to do it, but she can't, and then you feel that helpless, that disempowered to be able to do something about it. Yeah.
And apparently the Israeli reaction was against that scene. And spoiler alert for those who haven't watched the movie, but there is this horrible scene where this Palestinian family who are running away from these Israeli invaders and occupiers, they get found, a woman who has just given birth. They all get lined up against a wall and shot.
2 children and 1 baby as well.
Yeah, exactly. And and they were showing they were really critical of it, saying this is not how the IDF is. And those of us who have followed the IDF and who have followed what happens in Palestine at least a bit knows that actually that is what the IDF is.
Just 2 days ago, there was a girl on her own roof who was targeted by an IDF sniper.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
She was in her own house.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the whole, I found it very interesting that they used a female IDF soldier as well. And female IDF soldier was like, come on, let's get on with things. And it's because that's how they've kind of girl boss, whitewashed the actions of the IDF by showing these beautiful women with guns, kind of like your Lara Crofts, these Israeli women who are doing this. And this film upends that. It's like, this is what actually women in the IDF are doing.
Wow. No, it was, I think, a very, very strong depiction of the events there. Again, it is a tiny aspect of what the Nakba was. The Nakba was this displacement, essentially, for our viewers. It was a displacement of displacement is not the right word, but it was how early Zionist militias and later on the Israeli military also systematically evicted and made refugees out of 750,000 Palestinians, right? Many were killed during this process, as we've seen in the movie as well. There's numerous reports on this. This has been documented. There's no hiding that, oh no, this didn't take place, or denying it anymore. This took place, and the important thing is that this is not a historical event. This is an ongoing catastrophe, right?
Yeah.
Because the same policies that took place in 1947 are being perpetuated now as well by whatever you see, whether it's Sheikh Jarrah or in other places in Palestine. People are still being evicted. They're still losing their right of property and all of those issues.
And it's so interesting to look at it in the context of the films that we have seen, which are traditional Holocaust movies, because it's like, okay, this is being perpetrated. They're almost like congenital plagiarists of their own oppressors, and they're using that against the Palestinian people. And when the sheer numbers of it, so we see it in the sense of a small village, but 750,000 people had to leave their homes, and they were no longer Palestinian from that point.
400 towns, villages were completely decimated. They were destroyed. 400 villages. That's not a small number.
It's like that whole, not to quote Stalin, but to quote Stalin, 1 million deaths is a statistic, but the death of one person is a tragedy. And that is what storytelling is about. It's about talking about what that tragedy is, and then thinking about that writ large among 700,000 people's lives. All of them are Farha. It's just very
absolutely
crazy to think about.
And I think that's like when I finished the movie, she's walking on the road, and just before those lines come up, I was saying, is that it? I was hoping for a better understanding of this. It's not a documentary. It's not a historical documentary of what. And I think that's really good, because again, you get out of that statistical thing. You look at the human tragedy element of it. That through the eyes of this one individual, this massive tragedy that is such a big tragedy, much like the Holocaust itself, that you cannot put it in words. The law fails to adequately compensate for it, or you can't punish anyone enough to compensate for the harm that's been done, right? And so this is something that really challenges the limits of the law, or the limits of language, or the limits of human comprehension even. And that's why I think the only way to make sense of it is when we break it down and bring it to that individual level, and then start understanding it from there.
I agree. And even at the end, when the writing came up and they were talking about how Farha made her way to Syria, she lived on, these are, the stories of hers and many others. I was like, so her story is just starting, because I was thinking, how did she make it to Syria? And that must have been such an ordeal on top of an ordeal to actually make it all of that
as
way.
A young girl without any support like that. My God, No, anyway. Some of the IHL dimensions, when we're talking about the Nakba, there's just so much that has gone on, so many violations of IHL. We also have to look at the fact that, people might say that, this is 1948, the Geneva Conventions came in 49, but we all know that, IHL existed far beyond that. So in case anybody wants to put that up in the comments. But, the Nakba itself was torture, murder, forced transfer populations, and so much more that was taking place. There was an
Yeah.
occupation, all those rules that were taking place over there, that apply over there. Is there anything specific from the movie or from the other issues, Aisha, that you wanted to pick up and discuss?
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about how, so the scene where they attack the Palestinian family, and the informant, they have the Palestinian informant, who I think was her father.
Her uncle.
Her uncle.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Oh yes, it was her uncle.
Like a dad's cousin or something like that. I don't know.
So he's the informant that they have around, and he is being asked where are the weapons, and so they take him around, and then he's like, no, this family doesn't have any weapons on them, and yet they still target and shoot the family. So deliberate targeting of civilians who are not directly participating in hostilities. That is a war crime, as we know.
Absolutely.
At the end, with the baby, leaving them in a situation where that the baby is not going to the conditions of life as such. Again, violation of IHL and a war crime. What I found interesting was the little bit where the dad is being asked to join the movement, the resistance movement, and he says, "No, the Arabs. I have it on good authority that the Arabs are coming."
So local militias come to the father.
Yes.
And they ask him to join the militia
because they know something is going to happen. And he then says, no, the Arabs are coming. No, I'm not going to join. And we now know that the Arabs did not go and help them at that stage. And, even now, UAE, Saudi Arabia, with their agreements with Israel, it's not looking good for the Palestinians. But at that time...
On that point, I think, you've seen a lot of support during this World Cup, which is currently happening. And every Arab country that wins, they've got a Palestinian flag up. Morocco was promoting that. I really think it's the sentiment, the public sentiment for Palestine hasn't diminished at all. In fact, if anything, maybe it's going up. But I think what it is governments thinking that they're taking a pragmatic approach to the region, this and that, and not really. I think they're not in line. And of course, we don't have democratic governments in most of the Middle East. And so it's very easy for your government to bulldoze public opinion and push forward a particular policy that, your people don't really support.
Yeah. And it frustrates me so much that Pakistan, being a poor country as we are, which would gain so much more from recognition of Israel or anything like that, we would never do it. It's never really been on the cards because public sentiment is so horribly against it. And also, I think at the core, even among that leadership, even the very pragmatic ones are like, we'll do everything, not Israel. We're not touching that issue with the barge pole. That's where, that line ends between our emotions taking over versus pragmatic self-interest. But the Arabs, who you think should have such a strong connection to this and seem to have, they've really, and they're such rich countries, we can see what they've done in terms of oil production. When it serves them, they've been able to
turn off the taps.
To bring countries to heel. And yet on this issue, they're just letting self-interest run rampant. And I think it's despicable.
Oh, it's the height of hypocrisy. It's a very serious situation that, again, I think it goes to issues of democracy and how governance in the Middle East has traditionally been done. And, I studied this quite a bit. And, constitutions in the Middle East aren't really there for guaranteeing rights or things like that. A lot of those constitutions are there primarily for confirming succession.
Right.
That, when the king dies or when the ruler dies, who's going to become the next ruler, right? And of course, there are other purposes for that constitution, but it's less so for the people and more so for the ruling elite. And I think you see this everywhere. Pakistan has the same elite capture problem. We see this all across the world, but it's showing itself in very unique ways in the Middle East. And that's something, having lived there, having been part of that culture, you do feel that's certainly there.
Do you think it's also the whole my enemy's enemy is my friend with regards to
with
Iran,
and
because you're just okay, sure, you're very hard-lined against Iran, but really you're going to go into bed with Israel of all people to get
I mean, have you been to Iran, Tehran?
I've never been.
Okay, so I mean, you drive down Tehran, you've got big posters, Mudbar America, and they've got pro Palestinian organization posters, and they've got very anti-Israel stuff going on there. Clearly, part of Iran's foreign policy, there's no doubt, is a very anti-Israeli policy. None of the Arab countries are as openly or as vocally anti-Israel now, and many of them have accepted, traditionally even, so Egypt recognizes Israel, Jordan does, they've got embassies there, and everything. But you're very right. I think it could be, enemy of my enemy and things. And what does recognizing Israel bring to you? It brings you a treasure trove of technology, military technology. Yeah. It opens up, other avenues.
And water.
Because,
even with Jordan, they give Jordan 5% of Jordan's water needs. So are you really going to go against the country which is giving you water?
Exactly. So those are absolutely, those are critical issues which, I think Israel has done, from its part, a really sound job in, dangling this carrot in front of people and saying that, you have to recognize us, there's so many benefits to it.
And the technology is the biggest thing, because that Pegasus spyware that's just recently being used against Pakistani politicians and army members, and you're like, when you learn about how it can turn on the camera and just record you,
oh my god,
it's terrifying.
That is terrifying.
Yeah,
that is when someone else takes a selfie of you, that is the worst,
right? Just or when you accidentally flip to that on the, it's not great. No one should see that.
Anyway,
back to the laws of war. One of the things I did note was when they do invade, and when the villagers, and especially her dad, who is the mayor, picks up arms and you see him with a gun, I was thinking he would classify as a particular category of combatant, which is levé en masse. And so under the laws of war, they are civilians who spontaneously take up arms in the face of an invading army. They're not organized at all. It's purely spontaneous. And it is until that territory becomes occupied. So the minute that territory is occupied, they're no longer levé en masse. But for that period, so long as they comply with the laws of war, so long as they carry their arms openly, they are combatants who can get given POW status, prisoner of war status, under the laws of war.
And that's really what the distinction is between, say, a regular civilian directly participating in hostilities. He wouldn't get the POW status.
Yes, right? He wouldn't. And that would be, if you're directly participating in hostilities during an armed conflict, it is for a very, very narrow period of time, pre-occupation, when you are spontaneously taking up arms. So there was a conversation about this happening in Ukraine, that when the Russians were invading, those villagers who just took up arms to defend themselves, they were actually levé en masse. They would have to be given POW status.
Oh, wow.
It's apparently from the French Revolution, when they were saying that everyone is an enfranchised citizen. So all citizens are soldiers when they act to combat the enemy. That was a French terminology. So they decided, let's honor these people who are acting to defend their territory, their country. We are going to give them POW status.
That's really interesting. I can completely understand why that particular category would require additional privileges. In that anyone who's under immediate, the first thing you're going to do is self-defense and try to pick up arms, and you shouldn't be punished for that particular thing, right? So I think that was a really interesting point that you raised. Is there anything else with regards to, say, the occupation aspect of it, that even today, the same occupation that is there, we have a large portion of the Geneva Convention dealing with this, right? Is that being followed today in Israel? Because the things that the little bit of research that we've done on this, right? Things like calculating calories, what is the minimum amount of food that needs to go in, and let's try to ensure just that that happens. The number of trucks that need to go in to ensure that people in the Gaza Strip survive. It's just scares me at times how methodical, how industrialized this occupation has become, and how this could very well be verging on the verge of an extermination of these people, right? And everything has been used as a tool, as a bargaining chip against them. Their own water, their own tax money that is raised by them, their freedom of movement, things like that. So the Palestinian people are under this constant siege, occupation, the entire gamut of it all.
And it's really about the isolation that they're being put into. So in terms of, sure, you're allowing some humanitarian relief in, but when you're calculating calories, that means that you understand that there's no feasibility for civilian life unless you allow a certain amount of stuff in, which means that they are completely isolated from the rest of the world. And it's an isolation which has been ongoing for so long, and they're in these very, very crowded conditions in Gaza especially. So they call it the largest open-air prison in the world because it's 1.5 million people who are cloistered in these very, very tight, and then you're claiming that Hamas is everywhere. And so in terms of, and then we have this Israeli argument about human shields as well. So you're really, really not leaving people with much of an option. And when you are one of the technological giants in the world who is then playing a victim all of the time, you have Iron Dome technology, which Hamas rockets really don't have the power to really get into. I'm sorry that your animals are feeling really scared at night sometimes. But it's not comparable to what the Palestinians are going through. And especially in terms of the settler community that they're trying to move into Gaza. So that is a clear violation of the laws of occupation, which say that you're not allowed to have a demographic transfer into an occupation of your own civilian population. And they have been doing this ever since then. They've been taking Palestinian property, they've been moving Israelis in, and really it's with the end that these people should not be there at all.
No, absolutely. And I think, this playbook that they've developed there is something that is now being, they perfected the art of brutal occupation so well that, other regimes are now picking that up. And we see that happening in Kashmir. We see that happening elsewhere as well, right? So, for example, in, bodies of freedom fighters not being given back. That is a classic Israeli IDF, tool that's been used, and now it's being used in Kashmir as well. 100%. Demolishing homes. Right? Again, another tool that has been used and it's there.
And as a form of collective punishment.
Exactly.
Because they're saying you're the ones hiding the militants. You're the ones who are doing X, Y, Z, and that's why we have to demolish your entire homes. That's not how the laws of war work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In fact, they're specifically prohibited. Right? So anyway, actually, I think this was a really interesting discussion. Thank you so much. We hadn't budgeted this much time for it, but I think it's good that we were able to get a lot of these issues out. Ladies and gentlemen, if there are any particular issues or something that you want us to answer, we'd be more than happy to. Please leave us a note in the messages, in the messages down below. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. Bye.